you earlier in the slide, it says
Interesting.
calculate.
I close the
Say
brackets here
count
and
rows,
I press enter.
right?
Hello everyone, welcome once again to my YouTube channel. My name is Benga Adeyemo. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer and I'm also a Microsoft Certified Power BI Data Analyst. Now, I know I've shared a lot of videos in this channel concerning Power Query, for example, query parameters, query dependencies, and I know some people are wondering, what is query folding? What does that even mean? You know, as Power BI developers, it's very important for us to create reports that are fully optimized. You want to create a report that when you click on that, your refresh button, you want your data to update and also update your visuals too. You want to ensure that the data update happens as fast as possible. In fact, optimization is a very broad topic in Power BI. It's very broad because everything you do within your Power BI desktop or in your Power Query, they are all tending towards optimization. And if you know the techniques and the tips on how you can optimize your reports well, then the better your report is going to refresh and update. So query folding is a very important topic for any Power BI enthusiast or anybody who's tending towards a Power BI developer, right? And on this channel, you're in the right place because I'm going to be sharing content that will move you from just a beginner Power BI user to an intermediate Power BI user, then to an advanced Power BI user, right? So query folding is a very interesting topic because it determines also how your query is optimized and how the entire report is optimized. Now let's go to my slide. Now, query folding is a powerful feature in Power Query that pushes data transformations, right, back to the data source. For example, your SQL server, right, rather than processing them locally. So what does that even mean? What that means is that all those transformation steps that you do in your Power Query, right? Now there are some steps that there's some applied steps that the local machine, that is your Power Query, is the one that will process those transformations. There are some applied steps, right, that it is the source because the source understands it. The underlying source, for example, your SQL server understands, can interpret it, right? So it's going to be the one to process that transformation, right? So it means that we need to create more transformations, or we need to use, or we need to apply more transformation steps that your native query understands. That is, that your underlying source fully understands, that the underlying source can process, right? Because the more you have applied steps that Power Query is the one that is processing them, the lesser your report is going to be optimized, right? But if you have more steps that the underlying source is going to be the one to process, then the better optimized your report is going to be, right? So it's a very important topic because you need to know how to enforce query folding. You need to know how to ensure that all the transformation steps, everything you are transforming on your Power Query end, the underlying source, which is majorly your databases, they can process them, they understand them, they can interpret them, right? And the more optimized your report, right? Now, the reason for this is because it improves performance, right? You are reducing your wait time. You don't have to be waiting for your data to be loading and refreshing for a very long time, right? If you know the technique of query folding, if you are aware of query folding, it's going to make your reports to be better optimized. Now, when we apply transformation steps, right, in our Power Query, right, now, what query folding means is that, when those transformation steps, no matter how long, no matter how many steps, they can be written as just one SQL query. Is that not interesting? If everything I'm doing in Power Query, I'm merging, I'm appending, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm removing columns, I'm keeping some columns, I'm maintaining some rows, I'm removing some rows, I'm selecting some columns, different kind of things that we do, change data type, all of those things. There's a way we can ensure that the underlying source is the one that's processing them. Then we are improving the performance of our reports. And I know that every organization that wants to hire a Power BI developer, what they are looking for is somebody that understands optimization very well. Now, when query folding occurs, it means that the database is the one doing the heavy lifting, right? Data transfer, data processing is not done by the local machine. It's not done, on your own local system, right? As I said earlier, better performance for your data sets. Okay, let's go ahead. These are examples of queries that can fold. Let's start. Number one, when you select, when you filter, when you apply filter, when you filter on your rows, right? The SQL server can interpret that, or it can process that to be when you write a where clause, or when you use a where clause in your SQL query. So it's like the equivalent of that is when you use the where clause in your SQL query, right? Let's look at another one. Selecting columns. You know when you use that choose columns in your when you use that choose columns in your Power Query, when you use that choose columns, it's equivalent to you specifying the columns you want in your SQL query. For example, I have 10 columns in a table. I say select column 1, column 2, column 6, column 7 from so table, right? That is an example of one of the transformation steps that support query folding, right? Another one, when you do sorting, you sort ascending, you sort descending. The equivalent of that in SQL query, right, is when we use the DESN, which is descending, and ASC, which is ascending in our SQL queries. You see that for all of these transformation steps that I'm mentioning now, there is an equivalent SQL query to that, right? It means that SQL query can support it, it understands it, it can process it. So when you apply those transformation steps, it is the SQL query that is processing that transformation step. Good. Now, when you rename a column, you don't usually do that. Sometimes you can say select the sum of total sales column as you now give it a new name because you probably applied some aggregators like your sum or average or whatever. Sometimes you don't even need to do that, even if you don't apply aggregators, even if it's just that you call in that the name of you call out the name of that column in your SQL query and you just say as you give it a new name. Right? You want the new name to appear as the column name, right? So and when you rename a column in your Power Query, there's an equivalent SQL query to that. It means that the source, which is a database, your SQL server, understands it, right? It understands it. Now, let's go ahead. Now, when you do that group by in Power Query, when you use that group by function, that group by feature rather, that group by feature in your Power Query, especially when you want to start creating aggregated tables, right? There's an equivalent SQL query to that, which is when you select some columns, maybe probably use some aggregators, and then you group by a particular categorical column, right? So that is the equivalent of when you use the group by feature in Power Query. So this kind of transformation steps, you see that it can fold because it is what the source understands. It's what the SQL server understands. It's what it can even do at the SQL server level, right? Now, when you use joins, when you want to do merge, and when you want to do that, your merge, when you want to merge queries, when you want to return another column from another table, you'll see that option that will tell you whether you want to do a left join or right outer join or inner, blah blah blah. There is an equivalent SQL query for that transformation step, right? That is, we have in SQL in SQL2 we have different kinds of joins, your left join, your right join. So it means that this transformation step can fold, right? It can fold back to the source for the source to process that transformation. Interesting, right? When you do remove duplicates, that step, that remove duplicate step that you usually apply in your transformations in Power Query, now is an equivalent to that. The equivalent SQL query at the back end is when you say select distinct start from source, right? It means that when you apply that transformation step, there is an equivalent SQL query for that transformation steps in Power Query. Interesting, right? Now, when you used to apply conditional column, when you say when this is one, give it good. When this is two, give it average. Interesting. So there is an equivalent SQL query to that, which is when we use case when. Oh my God, it's very interesting. There's an equivalent SQL query to that transformation step that you are, that is happening in your Power Query, right? So case when SQL is the same as when you create conditional column in your Power Query. Is that not interesting? Let's go ahead. Now, is it possible for query folding to occur without you seeing that view native query? Don't worry, guys. I'm still going to open my Power Query. I'm still going to run you through the practical aspect of all of these things so that you actually see how query folding works and how you can ascertain that query is actually folding. But sometimes You know this view native query feature, when you right click on that transformation step and you see this view native query feature, you assume that yes, of course, that step that I applied is actually working, right? That means it's actually folding rather. It means that that step is folding, right? It means that the source is processing it. So there are times that apply that step, that operation you perform, that transformation that you do, even though it is among the list of transformation steps that the source can process, but you still see that the view native query option is not active, is not available. And you begin to wonder, does that mean that my query is not folding? Does that mean that my apply step is not folding back to the source to process? No. So I know that this might sound a little tricky, right? But I want to know that if the applied steps that you are applying to your transformation, like those things you do in your Power Query, those transformations that you do, note that for the fact that the view query native option is not available, does not mean that query folding is not happening at the backend. Query folding can still occur, even though the view native query option is not available, right? So let's look at different instances that this can happen. Now, the view query native is a conservative indicator, right? So if it shows the view query native, of course, the folding is happening. If it's missing, it does not mean that the folding is not happening or the folding has stopped. Now, sometimes the view native query might not be active, might not show, right? It might look like it's deactivated. Sometimes when you right click on that your apply step, and it's because sometimes the Power Query engine sometimes combine multiple steps into one SQL query instead of breaking them down one by one. It can combine multiple steps together as one. Another situation or another scenario that the view native query option might not be active, or query folding is still ongoing at the background, is when some transformations don't have direct SQL equivalents. That is, there's no equivalent SQL queries to that transformation step. The third one is that sometimes the user interface, when you right click and you don't see that view native query active, sometimes the user interface does not expose all the foldable operations. It's not everything that is foldable sometimes that the user interface will show. So that does not mean that query folding is not happening in the background. So don't get confused when you right click on a particular apply step and you don't see the view native query option active, right? Okay. Uh, some common scenarios, right? That some of them I've mentioned before. The additional ones is sometimes when you reorder your table, right? Some certain metadata operations are going on. Some data type conversions, right? Right. And when query folding happens automatically, right? Okay, let's go ahead. Queries that break folding. There are some things that you do on your Power Query that will not that does not support query folding, right? For example, when you add index column, maybe you bring in some data and probably you do not have what's it called? Maybe you do not have the primary key that comes with the data originally, and you now create index columns, especially for your dimension tables, right? So that does not support query folding, right? So when you add index column, it's not what the source understands. It's not what your database, your SQL server understands, right? Sometimes when you write very complex calculations, I mean very complex calculations, sometimes the underlying source might not understand that, right? It might be very hard for the source to understand that. I might not be able to process, and there might not be an equivalent SQL query to that transformation step, right? Some complex M formulas that cannot be translated in SQL when you perform binary operations, right? There are some certain types of data type conversions that you do that probably do not support query folding, right? Sometimes it's not all on pivoting step that you apply that would actually support query folding, right? Sometimes when you do that merging, and maybe one source is SQL, the other source is Excel, and you're not doing merging from the two. That query folding might not occur because it supports more of databases than sources like Excel. So query folding might not occur in that context. Let's go ahead. So this is a list of different data sources that support query folding, right? SQL Server, for example, all versions of SQL Server, your Azure SQL database, your Azure Synapse Analytics, Oracle database, MySQL, Postgre, and a lot of them like that, right? Snowflake, Google BigQuery. Now, other database systems like your Microsoft Access, to some extent, support query folding. SQLite has limited support for query folding. Let's go ahead. Some cloud data warehouse services like your Azure Data Lake Gen 2, you use some certain connectors, it supports query folding, right? Databricks via SQL endpoints, Amazon Antenna, right? Support query folding. So these are data sources that support query folding. Now, there are some data sources that partially support query folding, right? SharePoint lists, if you are doing just basic transformations that are not too complex, then SharePoint list also supports partially query folding. Dynamics 365, basic operations also. Salesforce, we are doing basic filtering, it supports query folding. But if you are going to be doing something more complex, more highly complex, it might not support query folding, right? All data feeds also have limited operations that support query folding. Now, there are sources that do not support query folding. There are data sources that do not support query folding. For example, your flat file, CSV, Excel, JSON, XML, those kind of sources do not support query folding, right? Web pages, when your data source is a web page, does not support query folding. Folder sources, binary files, PDF, images, do not support query folding. Most NoSQL databases, they are non-relational, right? So they do not support query folding. REST APIs, right? Active Directory. So now let's go into the practical part of this video. I'm going to show you how query folding works in Power Query. So guys, I'm running my Power BI desktop. I'm going to be importing some data from SQL Server. I'm going to be performing some transformations, and I'm going to be showing you whether the transformation step is folding or is not folding. We are going to look at that. Also, we are also going to look at the view native query option, whether it's active or whether it's not active. We are going to see that. Now, let me import in the data and let's see how it goes from there. Let's go ahead. So I go to get data, I go to SQL Server, right? And I'm going to just type in my server name here. Sorry, server name. And I'm going to click on OK. It's going to give me a list of all the databases and tables that I have in that server. And I'm dealing with transactions, I'm dealing with sales table, and I'll click on transform data. The Power Query editor is going to show up, and by default, I'm going to see source and navigation as my default transformation steps, right? So the source just tells you all the different databases that I have in that server, and the navigation apply step narrows it down to the exact table that I choose from that standard list of all the tables and the databases that I have. So now I'm dealing with the transaction database, I'm dealing with the sales table, right? Interesting. Now I'm going to perform a very interesting transformation step, right? The one I'm going to be doing is when we apply filter, and I'm going to be showing you the equivalent SQL query for that transformation step in Power Query. So when I click on the other ID, for example, maybe I probably also want to see only 1 and 10 and 100 and 1000 and 10,000 and 10,000 and 1, 10,000 and 4, and I click on OK. Now you see that I have filtered, I'm only filtering in only these selected other IDs. Now what is the equivalent SQL query of this apply step, of this transformation step? So I'm going to open my Azure Data Studio. I'm going to open my Azure Data Studio. I like the interface anyway, so that's why I like using Azure Data Studio. And then I'm going to, okay, I already have it here, but I need to reconnect back to, I need to connect back to that server, right? I click on connect. I click on connect. And also I want to ensure that this is on. Okay, so let me run this. It's telling me to reconnect again. Then I'm going to SQL, type in my, so this happens sometimes. So this is just how you go about it, right? So I must make sure that I trust certificate, and I click on connect. Then make sure that this is on transactions. So make sure that is, the database here is transactions. So I run this again, and I see the entire thing, the same thing that I see in the Power Query editor, what I'm seeing, what you're seeing here. Now, so when I filter other IDs, right, the equivalent SQL query of that is, for example, I say select star from sales where channel key is equals to 1, right, and I run. You see that it's only giving me the result based on when channel key is equals to 1. So when you filter in, whether you filter in or you filter out, the equivalent SQL query to that is when you use the where clause in your SQL query. So it means that the Power Query engine can process. It means that that particular apply step can fold back to the source, to the SQL server, right? So then let's go back to the Power Query editor and let's right click here. And you will see that the view native query option is active. So when I click on the view native query option now, you will see that my transformation steps up to this point is folded because the view query native option is active, right? I can see the equivalent SQL query for that my transformation step. Interesting. Let's look at another transformation steps that also supports query folding. For example, if I choose columns, now, for example, I click on choose columns, I specify the columns I want to see in this table. So let's say I don't want promotion key. Let's say I don't want the subcategory key. Maybe I don't even want cost of sales. Maybe I don't want cost of sales, and I click on OK. Right? This is the M code. Also, every transformation step, an M code is generated at the back end, right? And there's an SQL query equivalent also of that. That is for steps and support query folding, right? Okay. So I chose column. Now, what is the equivalent of that? It's like it's when we specify columns that we actually want in our SQL query. So let me go back to the Azure Data Studio, right? And for example, I can say select order ID, right? I can say select order ID. I can say order date, for example. I can say unit cost, right? From sales. I'm specifying only the columns that I want my query to bring up for me. So the equivalent of that transformation step that I took in my Power Query, which is choose columns, the equivalent query to that, the equivalent SQL query to that is when I use the select and I specify the columns I want from a particular table, right? So let me just put that here. Let me put that here and say choose column in Power Query. So that is the equivalent of that apply step. Okay, now let's take another apply step and see what is the equivalent of that. When you sort, you might want to sort ascending, you might want to sort descending. Let's say I want to sort the order ID, I want to sort it descending. You see now from the highest number to the lowest number. There's also an SQL query at the back end, right? There's also an SQL equivalent query for this apply step, right? Don't let me say it like that. Okay, so I just come here and say, right, select star from sales. Oh, I went to comment that. Sorry about that. Select star from sales, and you say order by what? Order by the order ID. Order by the order ID descending. Order by the order ID descending, and I run this. You will see now that you are seeing from the highest. Oh, forget about this all. It's not supposed to be part of the data. So what you are seeing now is that you are seeing from the highest number to the lower. It has sorted the order ID, descending order, right? So that is the equivalent of descending. Let's just say descending sorting, right? The same thing. We can also do ascending. Also, I can also do ascending, right? If I say ascending now, it's going to go from the lowest number for the order ID to the highest, right? So this is the equivalent SQL query when you sort in your Power Query, right? Okay, let's go ahead. Let's look at another automation steps. When you rename a column, so for example, instead of calling this one order quantity, I might decide I want to call it quantity, right? I want to call it quantity. Say quantity. Oh, let me type that again. Quantity, and I press enter, right? You see that the rename column, you see that step, right? That transformation step is folding. That's why you can see the view native query, right? You can see the view. See that all those my transformation steps, I've filtered, I've removed other columns, I've sorted my rows, I'm renaming a column. They are all steps that that support query folding. That there's an equivalent SQL query for those transformation steps, right? So let's go and look at the remaining column. How does that work in SQL? So for example, I can say, so let me just call this one renaming column. For example, I can say select star, or let me just say select order, or let me just say select, where's that? Okay, select order quantity, right? You can now use the word as quantity from sales, from sales, right? So you are renaming this other quantity to the quantity now, right? And I like that and I run it. You see that the other quantity is now called quantity. The same thing I did in my Power Query. There's an equivalent SQL query for that. It means that all these transformation steps that I've been applying since, right? The backend, the SQL server, which is data source, can process it, because it understands it, because there's an equivalent SQL query for it. So it can process it. And with that, the Power Query engine is not the one processing it, right? So it makes your refresh, it makes your optimization better, right? Okay, let's explore some probably other one, right? Let's look at the group by option. When you use the group by, when you use the group by option in Power Query, there's also an equivalent SQL query to that. So let's see how that works now. So I'm going to go to transform, and I'm going to say group by. And maybe probably I just want to, what do I want to group by? Okay, let me select the other ID. I want to say group by now. Then I want to group what do I want to say? I want to do a count of number one. Let me do a count of the other ID itself. Okay, it's not allowing me to do that. It's not allowing me. Okay, don't let me do that. Let's say I want to do a sum of quantity, the sum of the quantity column, right, for each of the other ID, and I click on OK. Right, I've applied the group by feature in Power Query. Now, what is the equivalent SQL query, right, to this group by that I just did? You see that after seeing the view native query option, it's still showing. It's interesting, right? Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my Azure Data Studio, and this is for group by now. This is for group by, right? And I'm going to say, for example, select select the sum of what? Which column? The order quantity, column as what? As quantity. I'm renaming it as quantity, right? Select some of the order quantity column as quantity, right? Uh, from sales, right? So let me just put the order ID column 2 there. The order ID, comma, yes. Then I will now say group by what? By the order ID. You should group by the order ID, right? And I run this, and you will now see that it has given me the sum of all the quantity for the different distinct order IDs that I have, right? So for this step also, you see that this is the equivalent SQL query of this group by that I did. I'm aggregating the data now, right? So it means that all of these steps that I'm performing now, right, query folding can definitely occur, because it can happen because they are all transformation steps that support query folding. So if I view the native query now, number one, the view native query is active, right? Number two is that query folding is when, and I told you earlier that query folding is when all your transformation steps can be written as one SQL query, right? Then query folding as a code, right? So this is the equivalent SQL query that is being generated. So it is interesting. Now, but one thing I want to show you now, if I change this to, maybe I change it to a whole number, I change this to a whole number and I right click, you see that my view native query is not active again. It means that up to this point is only when the folding is happening. When I click on the change type, the query folding is not happening again, right? So there are ways that one can manage this, and I'm going to show you an example, right? So I can click on this my change type. I can either drag it, maybe I can drag it to this point, right? I can move it to the back. I can move it to the back, and so that when I come here, oh, it's not working that way. Okay, let me see something. Let me move it a step before the group rows. And when I click on this, oh, perfect. Oh, the view query is not happening. So change type is not when you do some type of data type conversions. It does not query folding does not happen. Your query folding might break at some point. So how do you handle when such things happen? I'm going to be showing you another great example of how you can enforce query folding to occur, right? I will say that I learned this from Guy in the Cube, and I also saw an article from Chris Webb, which I'm going to share the link in the description part of this video so that you can also go there and read that article to learn more in how you can enable folding, how you can enforce query folding to occur. Let's go there. Then I'm going to probably just close this. I'm not saving anything. Discard changes and bring in that same table again. Just click on discard. Then I'll come back to my get data here. I'll click on SQL Server now. I'm going to do it in a different way. That's interesting. So I'll come to this now. I'll type in name of my server, and I'm going to just type that in. I'm not going to mention any database or any table. I'll just click on OK, right? I'll just click on OK. Now I'm going, instead of me specifying the table that I want, from my, like the other style I did, I selected sales. I'm not going to do that this time around. I'm going to right click on the database name. Wow, interesting. I'm going to click on transform from here. I'll right click, I'll click on transform data. My Power Query editor shows up, right? Perfect. That's exactly what I want. When it shows up, then it shows me, the list of those my tables in that particular database. What I'm going to do is, let me close this one. I don't need to refresh anything. There is FX feature you're seeing here. You just click on the FX feature and it shows this equals to transaction one. That is the name of the database. So what I will see here is my transaction one. Then what I'm going to put here, I'm going to put a little space, and come here and say value.native query, right? I'm going to open the bracket and I'm going to come here, close the bracket, and make sure that the transaction one is inside the bracket, right? And I'm now going to say select star from sales. Select star from sales, and I close this and I press enter. Now I can see my sales table from that transaction one database. Then I can now begin to, do some transformations. Like I can come here, I can, filter in and filter out where I did the other one. I can choose some of the other IDs that I want to see, right? I press OK. Okay, when I right click here, oh, I see now that query folding is not happening. The view native query is not happening. No. The tricky part of this is that, let me explain it to you. The tricky part of this is that although view native query is not active here, right? It's not clickable. But that does not mean that query folding is not occurring at the back end. Like query folding might still be occurring, but it's just that it's not the UI here is not showing, it's not bringing it up. Now, but what can I do to just make sure that I enforce that query folding to occur? Now, what I can do is this. I'm going to go back to that my custom one, where I did that value.native query. I'm going to go back there. I'm going to also have some things and say null, right? Comma parameter null. Then I'm going to be with my square bracket and say folding. Enable folding equals to true. Enable folding equals to true. Then I close brackets. Then I submit. Then when I go back to this my filtered rows now, and I right click, I'm going to see the view native query option now active, right? So these are ways you can make sure you enable query folding to occur. So let's say, for example, I choose columns again this time around, and maybe I probably don't want to see some columns. Maybe I don't want to see my promotion subcategory, and I just click OK, and I will see that every step that I take after that time, the step is being folded back to the source. I can see the view native query option now active. Okay, so what if I now come to other ID now and I change this to O number? Let's see what's going to happen. Is it still going to fold? I right click and it's not folding. It's not folding. So what do I do in this context now? What I can do is this. So let's say I go back to my remove other columns and let me just reduce it to only probably 3 columns. Let me just use it to only 3 columns. So I want to see order ID, order date, quantity, sales. I have just this 4, right? I have just this 4. So what will I do to ensure that changing this order ID data type from text to number does not affect my query folding? So I can choose to remove that apply step, right? And go back to this my custom one and customize it. And I'm going to be using cast. So how do I do that? It's going to be select, right? Shift and enter to move to the next line. It's going to be select, and I'm using cast. I have to ensure that I specify that order ID should change data type to whole number now, to integer. Integer is what is called in SQL Server. So select cast, the order ID, right? I will say as integer, and I will still say as order ID. This is the name I'm giving that column, right? And I can specify the other columns that I probably want to see. The order dates, right? Oh, this one has to have an underscore. The order dates. We probably want to see the order quantity also. The order quantity, and probably also want to see sales, right? So from this table, enable query folding, right, equals to true. Let me just check if everything is correct. As order ID, order date, order quantity, sales are from I don't need the star, from sales in enable folding. Let's see what happens now. Edit permission here and run this query. Good. And you see now that it has changed this, and I don't need to come and use that change. Oh, because I have to remove this step now. I have to remove this also because I did some transformation. So now this has changed to the integer data type, the whole number data type now in Power Query, because I have, customized my encode to ensure that query folding occur at the same time. That transformation step that do not support query folding, which is when I changed from text to whole number, I've also considered that in my encode here. So that is all today about query folding, guys. If you have any questions, please put it at the comment section here. I'm going to answer you. If you have more tips, if you have more comments, if you have better ways you can do this, please share your ideas and let's collaborate together. Thank you so much. See you in my next video. Bye.